Hello, I'm David Burton. I'm County Engagement Specialist with University of Missouri Extension. And I'm also the founder and coordinator of a program we call the Engage Neighbor Program. There's a lot of things that fall under the umbrella of that program. And I do get asked from time to time what all is involved, how a community or an organization can get connected with the Engage Neighbor Program. So that's the intent of this presentation, is kind of give you a overview of the program and what all is involved and how you can get connected with it. So let's get started. Again, the Engage Neighbor Program is a program of University of Missouri Extension. It started in 2019 with the idea of helping people connect and form relationships in their community, in their immediate neighborhood, and then in turn develop those skills to benefit their larger community. Really, the neighborhood is a safe place to get started in developing these relationships and trying out some new leadership skills and abilities, with the end goal being more volunteers and leaders in our communities to help make our communities a better place to live. My contact information can be found on the University of Missouri Extension website. That is extension.missouri.edu. I've been with the university for nearly 20 years now, working in community development. My primary counties for programming are Greene and Lawrence County. I grew up in this area, and if you have questions about neighboring or how you can get connected or specific questions about a program, I'd love to hear from you by phone or by email. So these are some of the programs that I offer. These kind of fit under that broad umbrella of the program that we call Becoming an Engaged Neighbor, or an Engaged Neighbor program. One of those in 2020, we started a pilot project with 8 neighborhoods. Those neighborhoods are all in Greene County. They're very different types of neighborhoods. This is a bit of a research project as well, but we're working with 8 of those neighborhoods, providing them with a quarterly mailed newsletter about neighboring and how to engage with their neighbors and how to improve their neighborhood. Those newsletters have information about our Engaged Neighbor program and the classes we do as well. We're also going to do a block party in each of those 8 neighborhoods. We have some grant money set aside that residents can apply for to put to work in their neighborhoods as well. And then we're investing in a leader or a connector in each neighborhood to really train them in what it means to be a good neighbor and how to get others involved in neighboring. And so we hope, as we track some of the progress in those neighborhoods, that after 2 years that people can say their neighborhood is cleaner and safer and friendlier as a result of the pilot project and the work that's been done there. Becoming an Engaged Neighbor is kind of the term we use for the whole umbrella program. It's also the name of an online class that I teach each spring and fall. It's a 6 weeks session that is done both through independent learning and video watching, as well as a discussion group through Zoom, and really learning some of the theory behind neighboring, but also best practices, things to put into practice in your own neighborhood, the value in getting to know your neighbors. It's a very comprehensive class, and the end goal is some sort of project, or at least an idea for a project you can do in your own neighborhood. And then Neighboring 101. I teach that class each month. It's free. You do have to pre-register for it through the MU Extension website. We have a different guest on, at least one different guest each month. We're looking again at best practices and ideas about how to improve your neighborhood or your community through different types of neighboring projects and ideas. When I launched this class back at the start of 2020, my hope was that we would have 10 or 20 local people in the class. We have over 400 people registered for the class now. And so it's exceeded my expectations, and participants are from all over the country: Ohio and Florida, Colorado, Kansas, uh, New York, Virginia, throughout the nation. You do have to register for the class to be able to attend that class live on the third Thursday of each month during the noon hour, or you do have to register to get the recording of that class. But you can connect with it in either one of those ways. And I would encourage you to enroll. It's a great class. Now, some of the other programs that I'm involved with, I'm working with some businesses to do pilot projects or pilot neighboring projects with their employees. I'm also part of the team that puts together Lawn Art with Neighbors. We use the LAWN acronym as a way to get to know your neighbors, as a way to interact in your community. LAWN is a program that happens here in Greene County each year, and we always look to grow it each year, but we usually have, in these past years, we've had 60 to 75 people that have done lawn sculptures, and we make it available on a map, and people tour around and look at those projects. But it's also a great way to do a fun project, a fun lawn sculpture with your neighbors as well. And so that's why we're involved, Lawn Art with Neighborings. Then also developing some pilot projects with several area churches on neighboring education and getting membership inspired and involved in understanding neighboring and building relationships with their own neighbors. And then annually, we also offer the Neighborhood Leadership Academy. This is actually a statewide class. It's 10 weeks in length. It meets one night a week. You have some reading and some projects to do along, and then the evening class. And again, there are participants from all over the state. Here in Greene County, we have a couple of tours and a couple of local gatherings of people in that class to create networking and to add to the education beyond what's taking place online. Through our Engage Neighbor program, we're also working with some developers on creating what we would call engaged neighbor communities, and what that means and how residents and developers can be involved from the very beginning on creating a neighborhood where neighbors can really feel connected and get connected. We also have yard signs available for those neighborhoods that are part of our Engaged Neighbor network, or for communities that want to become an engaged neighbor community. There is a process for doing that as well. That also is described on our extension.missouri.edu website. If you search for Engaged Neighbor, you'll go to a page that has a lot of that information on it, as well as news articles and other information on the general website about being a great neighbor. We have some dates to celebrate that we really put emphasis on through this Engaged Neighbor program. One of those is National Good Neighbor Day. It always falls on September 28th. It was proclaimed as a national holiday by President Jimmy Carter. In Greene County, we're really taking a whole week to try and create energy and excitement and conversation and participation around this idea of getting to know your neighbors around National Good Neighbor Day. Here in 2021, we're doing what we're calling the 1,000 Acts of Neighboring Challenge, where people can participate in this and actually win prizes and awards. Every community is going to be giving a cash award for the best act of neighboring in that community. And it's based on what people have submitted through what they have done that week with their neighbors, all to create some local excitement about this idea of being a good neighbor and what that means all year round, not just on one single day of the year. Then in the spring, we partner with the Greene County Library to celebrate Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood for Won't You Be My Neighbor Day, which is March 20th. This year in 2021, we had 2 guest speakers during that week, and we also did a 100 Acts of Kindness challenge, which had some great engagement from the community and from library patrons. Well, personally, when it comes to neighboring, I was a great neighbor until I discovered I was not. I would have told you that I keep my yard up, I mow my leaves, I don't throw loud parties, I wave at people, I pick up after my dog Otis when I take him on a walk. But these things do not make you a great neighbor. And my wife and I noticed that just over time, as neighbors had moved and new people had moved in, we had done a very poor job of getting to know them. Really to the point where we just knew a couple of our neighbors by name. So we need to be doing better. We should be doing better. So we took a more direct approach, knocking on windows and handing over food and a sheet of information with our names and contact information on it as a direct approach, but also learning our neighbors' names. That's the first place to start. You have to learn and remember the names of your neighbors. So require some sort of initial interaction. And then we provide a chart that I show later in this presentation that we use, that once we meet a neighbor and learn their name, we write that name down on the chart and we put it on a refrigerator so we can remember it, so we're ready to use their name the next time we see them. We have discovered, as we have worked to get to know our neighbors, that some really good things can happen if you truly get to know the people in your neighborhood and they get to know you. We sometimes call it prospecting on our neighborhood, because there are some real jewels around us that we really had no idea, because we had not taken the effort to get out and meet our neighbors. Apathy and neighboring are not compatible. In fact, you may be familiar with the phrase "love your neighbor," and some people might think the opposite of love is hating your neighbor, but actually the opposite of loving your neighbor is apathy, not even caring enough to get to know them. And if we do better, some truly great things can happen in your neighborhood. Is there a need? Well, there is a lot of research around this topic, especially over the last 8 years or so, that really looks at neighboring and how that has changed in the United States. Several different neighbors look at how well we know our neighbors. And one of them asked, do you know the names of your neighbors? A fact about them, have you interacted with them in the last month? In the Colorado study that was done, only 3% of participants could say yes to all 3 of those questions. In other research, like by the Pew Research Center, where people got to answer that question on their own terms about whether or not they know their 8 closest neighbors, in some of those surveys, as low as 10% of Americans say they know their 8 closest neighbors. In fact, in that Pew Research Center study, fewer than 20% say they think it's even important to know your neighbors. Less than 20%. So you've got 80% of the American population saying, it's not important for me to know my neighbors. I don't want to know my neighbors to some degree. Just leave me alone. And the irony of this is that meanwhile, all sorts of national research showing that we have an epidemic of loneliness. And this was pre-pandemic. This was before the lockdown. Americans were saying they felt isolated and lonely. Some of the demographic groups as high as 40 and 45% of adults that are saying they feel isolated and lonely. Neighboring and developing relationships with your immediate neighbors is a great way to overcome loneliness. Our lack of face-to-face social interaction leads to deeper social problems. And we're seeing some of that in our culture now. We've lost this ability to develop relationships with people that don't think like us, to have friendly conversation and interaction over ideas, just really understanding what it takes to develop a relationship. And a lot of these decreases in face-to-face social interaction is because of so much more online social media interaction, and that is not the same. Those are not real relationships. You won't find any research suggesting it is. This is not as strong a connection as face to face, nor is it as good for your health as developing face to face interactions. So, neighboring is a big part of that and a big part of why we push that because we understand the health benefits of it. We also in the United States see decreases in associations, people gathering around common shared ideas or interests. That used to be a secret to our American success. Alexis de Tocqueville wrote about that 250 years ago. But the decreases in association has led to deeper political and social problems in the United States. Neighboring positively impacts our loneliness crisis. Neighboring can reduce crime in neighborhoods by as much as 60%. Neighboring can increase both place attachment and local spending, how you feel about your hometown and how you interact with that. Neighboring actually improves your health. You're more likely to recover from a surgery. You're more likely to recover from a serious health ailment if you have strong neighbor connections. Neighboring provides a community benefit. It can lead to people volunteering in the community or really blossoming and growing into a community leader. And for some, loving a neighbor is really part of a calling or a command to do, to love their neighbor regardless of shared interest or any interest commonalities at all. So for some see that as a calling. So why the change? It really is a choice. Neighboring is a choice. It's your choice. Do you want to have a positive impact on your neighborhood? This is the perfect place to start. If you want a friendlier neighborhood or community, you begin by being the change you want to see. It all begins with you. Now, not everyone is my neighbor. I hear that sometimes. People talk about things they're doing all over town. If this is an example of neighboring, they've been to a benefit run to help their neighbors. This is not the same thing. This is not the same as loving your neighbor. It's kind of easy because we pick things we're interested in and people that are like us, and we call it neighboring. Dave Runyon, in his book, The Art of Neighboring, says that we have this metaphoric love for a metaphoric neighbor, and metaphorically, we're killing it. But meanwhile, we don't know our immediate next door neighbors. See, the problem is when you aim for everything, when you say everyone is my neighbor, when you aim for everything, you hit nothing. So when we insist we're neighbors with everybody, we often end up being neighbors with nobody. That's why the emphasis on neighboring and learning the names and building relationships with your 8 closest neighbors. Now, how do we define neighboring as part of the Engaged Neighbor program with University of Missouri Extension? We define it this way. Neighboring is the art and skill of building relationships with people who live in the closest proximity to you. That can apply to an apartment, to a rural setting, to an urban setting. We go on to say that neighboring begins by learning and using names. It grows through association, and ultimately it bears fruit when engaged neighbors who can positively impact their community and love their neighbors. Surely we're not too busy to be friendly with the neighbors living next door to us. I know schedules are crazy, but a big part of neighboring is just making yourself available, stopping at the mailbox when you get the mail, not just racing inside the house and putting down your garage door, doing more front yard living. If you don't have a front porch, put the lawn chairs on the driveway. Being in your front yard, sort of, some people have called it a ministry of availability. Just making yourself available to be seen is a place to start in building neighbor relationships. Well, now, whether you're a member of an extension council or just a general member of the public, the way you begin becoming a more engaged neighbor is the same. Learn and use your neighbors' names, connect with your neighbors over shared interests, and throw some great parties. Maybe it's just a cookout on your driveway. But if you're in a position of leadership somewhere, you really need to lead by example in this area of neighboring. That certainly applies to members of our extension councils in Missouri, and it applies to other groups too that have an interest in neighboring. Now, this is the chart that I mentioned earlier. It's on our website. Again, you can go to extension.missouri.edu. If you search for the Engage Neighbor program, it's on the Greene County Extension website. You'll find a PDF of a new version of our Who is My Neighbor chart. And you have squares here that you're able to fill in. These are the properties that adjoin you, whether you're in a subdivision or the country or an apartment. And this gives you a little chart, a great opportunity to write down the names of your neighbors, maybe a fact about them, a phone number as you learn them. Keep your chart updated and working on that and available so you can see names and remember those names, because it is so much better to have a neighbor out and be able to say, "Hey, Matt, how are you doing?" as opposed to saying, "Hey, you," or "Hey, neighbor," because you don't know their name. So learn and use their names. Neighboring has a lot of powerful benefits. We're seeing this through our own local research and feedback. We had this great example a couple of years ago from Republic, where a young lady said her yard was unkept and some neighbors reported her for code violations. And she said it really changed her view of what it meant to be a neighbor. She didn't know any of her immediate neighbors, and obviously none of her neighbors knew her, or else they would have known that she was 8 months pregnant and in bed for medical reasons, and that her husband had started working nights trying to earn some more money. And I think, in fact, she even told us that her lawnmower was broken, and the neighbor reported their yard for not being mowed, when really a better approach as a neighbor would have been to mow her yard, knowing that she was pregnant and in bed, to help her out. That would have helped develop a relationship even more, instead of leaving a really bad taste in someone's mouth over the fact that they were ticketed and called in by people living right next door to them. Well, we're getting ready to conclude here. I often get asked about ideas and resources. There are lots of books and research being done on this topic. Some of my favorites include The Art of Neighboring by Dave Runyon and Jay Paddock. John McKnight has a book called The Abundant Community, which is really about using asset-based community development in neighborhoods. It's a powerful read. The book Together just came out in 2021. It's about the healing power of human connections. I recommend that book. Kristen Schell has a book called The Turquoise Table, which is also about neighboring and front yard living, I would add. Melanie Warnock, This Is Where You Belong. It's all about learning to love where you live. And neighboring can be a great part of that. Her book, This Is Where You Belong, is a very good read. A personal favorite of mine, Next Door as It Is in Heaven by Lance Ford out of Kansas City, is a great overview piece about neighboring and what that impact can be. And The Village Effect by Sarah Pinkler is just full of research, social research, about the impact of neighboring and developing social relationships. Now, I do have one other piece of information that is sought after and more people are asking me about all the time. You can get access to this, what is now a 150-page document from our Engage Neighbor program. It includes examples of projects and flyers and research charts and a great list of resources and all sorts of information about implementing neighboring ideas in your community or in your neighborhood or in your church, and sort of the research behind that, and a lot of great information about our Engage Neighbor program and how we're growing it and where it's going. But the only way you can get a copy of that document is by taking our survey. We want to know a little bit about what you know about neighboring. These are the links to that, or you can also find the link on our Engage Neighbor program page on the Greene County EMU Extension website. So again, my name is David Burton. I'm headquartered in Springfield, Missouri, Greene County, with University of Missouri Extension. Feel free to give me a call or send me an email. Always glad to talk about neighboring with any of my friends. Thank you.